You don't have to rip the mask off overnight. Nobody's asking you to walk into your next meeting and announce that you've been performing for 20 years now and you're done. Nobody is asking you either to rebuild your entire personality from scratch before Tuesday. Nobody is expecting you to show up somewhere next week as a completely different, fully unmasked version of yourself and have it go perfectly. That's not what this is. Unmasking is not an event. It's not a decision you make once in a single dramatic moment and then it's done. It's a direction, a very slow, very gentle turn towards yourself. And it starts somewhere really very much smaller than you think. If you've been listening to this series and you've been waiting for the part where someone tells you what to actually do with all of this, this is that episode.
Welcome to Inside the Pickle Jar, a podcast where we dive into the wonderfully quirky world of neurodiversity. Listen on to Inside the Pickle Jar, where every connection matters, every pickle has its place.
I'm Tanya. I'm a PCC credentialed coach, and I'm also neurodivergent. Over the last 4 episodes, we've covered a lot of heavy territory. What masking is and where it comes from, what it costs in your body and your energy and your sense of self, what it feels like to realize you've been performing your whole life, the unspoken social rules that neurodivergent people are expected to know without being taught. That's a lot to sit with. Today is different. Today we talk about what comes next. Not the whole journey, because the whole journey is long and it looks different for everyone. And I'm not going to pretend otherwise. This is just the beginning of it. The first few steps. Because sometimes the beginning is the only thing standing between you and the rest of the path. Before we go in, a quick pause. If you've been listening to this series, or if you've been listening this far in this video, and you have finally found some language for what you've been experiencing, but you're not sure how to start explaining it to the people around you, I made something for exactly that. It's a free guide called 4 Things I Need the People in My Life to Know About My Brain. It does the explaining for you, so you don't have to find the words yourself. You can go grab it from the description, and then we'll just keep going. Before we talk about how to start unmasking, it's worth naming why it feels so terrifying in the first place. Because it does. For most people, the idea of unmasking, of letting the performed version of themselves slip, even slightly, brings up a very specific kind of fear. Like, what if people don't like the real me? What if I lose relationships that have been built around the masked version of me? And what if my partner or my friends, my colleagues, have all built their understanding of me around the performance, and the real version doesn't fit what they've come to expect? And then what if I get it wrong? What if I take the mask off in the wrong place, at the wrong time, with the wrong person, and it costs me something I can't afford to lose? Those are not irrational fears. They're not anxiety spirals or catastrophic thinking. They're based on real experiences. Most neurodivergent adults have a very specific memory, or several, of what happens when the mask slips unexpectedly. The conversation that went sideways, the relationship that cooled, the job situation that got complicated. I've definitely been there. The moment you were too much or too honest or too direct and you felt the temperature in the room shift, that's what I mean. So the mask stayed on. Not because you're weak, and not because you were being dishonest, but because you learned through experience what it cost when it came off at the wrong moment. Unmasking safely means understanding that those fears are valid. honoring them rather than arguing with them, and working with them rather than trying to bulldoze through them. The goal is not fearlessness. Fearlessness is not a requirement for unmasking, and I'd be suspicious of anyone who told you it was. The goal is to find the places where a little less fear is possible, where the risk is lower, where the cost of being real is small enough to be worth it. Because those places exist, even if you haven't found them yet. This is the most important thing I want you to take away from this entire episode. Unmasking is not all or nothing. You do not have to unmask everywhere, with everyone, in every context, all at the same time. You are allowed to keep the mask on in some places while you practice putting it down in others. That's not hypocrisy. That is not failure. That is wisdom about how change actually works in a human body and a human life. Think about how you would approach any other skill you were learning from scratch. You wouldn't start training for a marathon by running 26 miles on day one. You'd start with a mile. You'd build slowly, letting your body adapt, noticing what's working and what needs adjustment before you ask it for more. Unmasking works the same way. You build the capacity for it gradually, in safe conditions, before you take it somewhere harder. Little T learned to mask early because the world wasn't always safe for her natural self. She doesn't need to unlearn everything at once. She doesn't need to walk into the most difficult high-stakes environment in her life and perform a complete unmasking. She needs to find one place or one person, one context where she gets to be a little more herself, just a little. Just enough to remember what that feels like. Because a lot of us have been masking for so long that we've forgotten. Not in a dramatic way, just quietly, gradually, we've lost track of what it feels like to be in a room and not be working, to be in a conversation and not be performing, to exist somewhere with someone without running the second program. One safe space is where it starts to come back. The somewhere might be with a therapist or a coach like me who knows your full history. It might be with one friend who already sees you and accepts you without requiring you to be different. It might be in a neurodivergent community, online like this one, or in person, where you don't have to translate yourself before you speak. It might be a journal, or in a long drive, or in a conversation with your dog, or in this podcast. Somewhere that feels safe enough to let one small thing be real, that's your starting point. Not everywhere, just somewhere. So how do you identify where it's actually safe to unmask? Because not every space that feels comfortable is actually low mask. And not every space that feels uncomfortable is necessarily high mask either. Sometimes discomfort is just newness. And newness passes. Your body already knows the difference. You just have to start listening to it, specifically after interactions, rather than during them. So, during an interaction, you might be masking so smoothly that it's genuinely hard to tell how much energy you're spending. The performance is happening automatically, and you're focused on the content of what's being said. Well, then, pay attention to how you feel after, when you leave, when your interaction's over, when you're back in your car or back in your house or lying in bed that night. Do you feel drained in a bone-deep way that takes more than a day to fully recover from? That's almost certainly a high mask environment. The energy cost was significant, even if you handled it well in the moment. But then do you feel maybe only just a little tired, but okay? A little depleted, but not wrecked? That might be moderate masking, which is normal and sustainable in doses. Most of us have to do some amount of social performance, and that's not something to eliminate entirely. It's something to manage with intention. Or do you feel somehow more yourself than you did before the interaction? Like, did you put something down for a while rather than picking something up? That's a low mask space. That's rare and worth protecting. The people and places that consistently leave you feeling closer to yourself are your starting points for unmasking. Those are where you practice. Those are where you build the muscle before you try it somewhere that costs more. You might not have many of those spaces right now. For some neurodivergent adults, particularly those who are newly identified or who have been masking heavily for a very long time, identifying even one genuinely low mask space is the first piece of actual work. And that's okay. Building those spaces is part of the process, not a prerequisite for starting it. Unmasking doesn't usually look dramatic, especially at first. It doesn't look like standing up in a meeting and announcing that everything has changed. It doesn't look like an overnight personality shift that everyone around you immediately notices and comments on. It looks much quieter than that. And that's actually a good thing because quiet changes tend to stick. It might look like telling someone you trust that you're actually not fine right now, instead of saying, I'm fine, just once, just to one person, to see what happens when you say the true thing instead of the comfortable one. Try skipping the forced eye contact with a colleague you feel comfortable with and noticing that the conversation doesn't fall apart, that the relationship survives your eyes being somewhere other than locked into theirs. Or telling your partner that you need 10 minutes alone after a social event, instead of pushing through because you think you should be able to handle it. Giving your nervous system the transition time it's been asking for without punishing yourself for needing it. Maybe it's saying, I don't know, instead of performing competence in a moment when you genuinely don't know. Letting the not knowing exist without rushing to fill it with a performance of certainty. It might look like wearing the clothes that feel right for your nervous system to an event where you previously would have worn the clothes that looked more acceptable. Choosing your own comfort over other people's aesthetic expectations in a context small enough that it feels survivable. Maybe letting yourself be visibly excited about something you love, passionate, even when the intensity of it would have embarrassed you before. Letting the real reaction show, even briefly, even partially, just to see what it feels like, not to suppress it. Those things sound small. They are small. That's exactly the point. Every small moment of honesty is a data point, a piece of evidence that the real version of you can exist in the world without everything falling apart. And over time, those data points accumulate into something that starts to feel like safety, like trust in yourself, like a quiet confidence that doesn't cost you anything to maintain. That's what you're building, not a dramatic transformation, a collection of small, honest moments, one at a time. Unmasking doesn't always go smoothly. And I think it's important to say that clearly rather than leave you with the impression that if you just follow these steps, everything will unfold gracefully. Sometimes you let something real show and the response isn't what you hoped for. Sometimes the person can't hold it. Sometimes you misjudge the safety of a situation. Sometimes you have a hard day and the mask slips somewhere you didn't intend and the fallout is uncomfortable. Well, when that happens, try not to use it as evidence that unmasking doesn't work. Try not to use it as evidence that you're doing it wrong, or that you misjudged yourself, or that the real version of you is too much after all, and the mask was the only thing keeping everything functional. It's evidence of something much simpler, that you're practicing something new, and new things go wrong before they go right. Every time, for everyone, without exception. Every person who has ever learned anything, from riding a bike, to speaking a new language, to building a marriage, to running a marathon like I talked about earlier, has gotten it wrong before they got it right. The mistakes are not proof that you should stop. They're proof that you're actually doing it. The goal is not to unmask perfectly. Perfectly is a performance, and we're trying to move away from performances here. The goal is to unmask honestly, to keep moving in the general direction of yourself, even when it's uncomfortable, even when it's slow, even when you take 2 steps back before you take 1 step forward. Progress in this work is not linear. That's not a flaw in your process. That's how change actually works in a human life. The jar exists for this, not to fix you, not to teach you how to perform better or mask more efficiently or become a version of your neurodivergent self that's more palatable to the people around you. The jar, the pickle jar, exists because there needs to be a place where you get to come back to yourself, where you hear your experience reflected back to you without shame, without judgment, without the quiet implication that you need to be different in order to deserve belonging. You have never needed to be different to deserve belonging. You've just been in the wrong rooms. Also, you were never too much. You just couldn't read the jar. But now you're here. You found it. That is not a small thing. People spend years not finding it. People spend their whole lives performing because nobody ever told them there was somewhere they didn't have to be. You're here, and that matters more than you might realize. So that's where unmasking starts. Not with a dramatic announcement or a complete reinvention. Not with ripping everything apart at once or becoming an entirely different person by next week. It starts with one safe space, one honest moment, one small decision to let something real exist in the world that you might have hidden before. It starts with little T remembering what it felt like to be herself before she learned that herself wasn't always welcome. It starts here, right now, with you listening to this or watching this and deciding that you deserve to know what it feels like to put some of this down. So, if you haven't already, grab the free guide in the description. 4 things I need the people in my life to know about my brain. It might be the thing that opens one of the conversations that makes unmasking feel a little less lonely. And if you're still sitting with the weight of how much masking has cost you and you haven't watched this one yet, it's a great place to go next. It's called The Hidden Cost of Masking as a Neurodivergent Adult, and it puts language to exactly what you have been carrying all this time. So be gentle with yourself, pickle friend. And if you found this episode helpful, please share it, please subscribe, and I'll see you next time inside the pickle jar.